Friday, 29th December 2022, just after 8 o'clock in the morning. In the heart of London's financial district, Metropolitan Police officers prepared to move. Inside the high-rise towers, 2 quiet apartments were about to be opened by force. They weren't looking for drugs or weapons. What they were about to find was something far cleaner and far darker. Beneath the surface of normality was a network that had been moving millions of pounds across Britain for years. A system built on silence and precision. Behind one door, money moved without names. Behind another, a network no one could see. And on the 1st of July 2024, hundreds of miles away, a single message was being sent. One that would expose just how deeply Britain's underworld had learned to hide in plain sight. What they uncovered that morning would draw investigators into a web of coded messages, fake transactions, and a chain that stretched far beyond London. It wasn't chaos, it was controlled, and every part of it had been built to be invisible. This is the story of Chinese networks and the quiet operators running Britain's dirty money, and how one discovery set everything in motion. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. At the center of the network was a man few had ever heard of, Chiji Wang, 29 years old, living quietly in a riverside apartment on the left bank in Manchester. He had no criminal record, with no visible wealth and no reason to draw attention. Yet, over the course of 3 years, detectives would learn that he was controlling the movement of more than £55 million through the country's capital and beyond. The connection to him was not immediate. It came from the meticulous recovery of data on several seized phones during earlier raids in East London. Officers scrolling through encrypted messages found an account that appeared repeatedly in transaction logs, a username written in Mandarin, which translated to, "There is a big sun in the sky." It appeared to be an organizer, someone giving instructions, confirming amounts, and managing couriers without ever naming them. The tone of the messages was professional, never personal, and written with the kind of efficiency that resembled an accountant more than a criminal. Forensic teams began piecing together fragments of digital evidence. Serial numbers of banknotes photographed and sent through the app matched cash, later seized in raids. We will discuss this in the later part of this video. Wang operated like a remote manager. From his apartment, he coordinated cash pickups across London. Among those couriers were Xiaoyu Xu and Yinying Wang, both based in Canary, Wharf. They acted as collectors, receiving large amounts of British pounds from unknown sources, sometimes £250,000 in a single collection. Working alongside them was Yunchen Huang, also operating from the same luxury towers. His flat was fitted with counting machines and bags for sorting cash. 2 more, Peng Lu and Ang Li, ran an unregistered money service business from Peninsula Square, only a few miles away. Their role was to handle smaller transfers and keep the flow of cash steady when larger shipments were delayed. In Manchester, Ruel and Chen provided a regional base, helping Wang manage records and coordinate collections. The key to the success of this operation was the way every person knew only their part. Xu and Wang never met the people they collected cash from, and those handing it over never knew who would receive it. How the system ensured transactions could occur without names, signatures, or risk of identification, that is where we are headed in a few minutes. For detectives, the structure looked complete, a network built to leave no trace. But the question remained, how exactly did the money move, and who was paying for it? The answer would lead them deeper into a system that blurred the line between business and crime. At the heart of the operation was a simple, effective idea: use people with lawful access to foreign currency to exchange value without touching the formal banking system. The gang relied on a popular Chinese messaging platform to broker deals, private chats where offers were posted, amounts confirmed, and collection points arranged. These messages read like business instructions: sums, times, and a single verification method that replaced every personal detail. Students and other clients in China wanted pounds but were constrained by strict capital controls. China limits personal outward transfers to roughly $50,000 a year. To get round that, the students sent yuan into designated accounts in China. In the UK, couriers supplied the agreed amount in sterling. No cross-border bank transfer linked payer to payee. No wire trail tied a British pickup to a Chinese deposit. Instead, the exchange was completed inside the chain itself. Verification was deliberately low-tech and highly secure. Each pickup was confirmed by a photograph of a single £5 note showing its unique serial number. That image moved through the encrypted chat to the next participant and acted as proof of exchange. When the recipient handed over cash, the courier compared serial numbers. Only then was the transaction considered complete. The method removed the need for names, bank accounts, or receipts. It reduced every interaction to a code and an image. Records recovered later showed a steady flow of consignments over years, each logged to an internal ledger rather than a regulated account. Operational secrecy was engineered at every level. There were no formal meetings between players and the organizers. The process was invisible, yet, as flawless as it seemed, every message, every photograph left a digital fingerprint. It was only a matter of time before one of those fingerprints found its way to the police. The story didn't begin with a major raid or an encrypted message. It started quietly in early 2020 when local officers in North London began to notice a pattern. The same names appeared on different cash declarations. The same streets kept surfacing in unrelated reports of suspicious financial activity. None of it was overtly criminal, but it didn't fit the profile of legitimate business either. At the time, the Stoke Newington police team was already familiar with small-scale underground banking. Informal money transfers, often set up to help communities move funds between the UK and abroad, weren't uncommon. But what caught attention here was the volume and frequency. Cash collections were happening several times a week, always by different individuals, always to similar addresses in Canary, Wharf and East London. The figures involved were large, sometimes exceeding what an entire small business might handle in a month. Officers began to build quiet intelligence around what they suspected could be an organized fei qian, a traditional Chinese underground banking method meaning flying money. Through early surveillance, plainclothes officers watched couriers arrive at residential buildings carrying ordinary shopping bags or small suitcases. They entered quickly, left minutes later, and blended back into the crowd. The activity appeared routine enough to avoid attention, but when data analysts compared these movements with CCTV and bank reporting, the same addresses kept reappearing, always linked to large deposits or unexplained money handovers. The early months of 2020 coincided with London's pandemic restrictions, and much of the city was still quiet. That made the activity stand out even more. Couriers moved during lockdown periods, often carrying written work permits or food delivery to justify their travel. In hindsight, that period gave the group freedom to move large sums of cash, while much of the capital remained behind closed doors. DC Zach Rowe and his team began formal intelligence gathering, flagging the behavior to the Metropolitan Police's Economic Crime Unit. Data from banks, landlords, and property managers gradually painted a picture of a network. What started as a handful of suspicious movements was beginning to unravel into something far larger. And by the time police reached the towers of Canary Wharf, the scale of the operation would become impossible to ignore. On the morning of the 29th of December 2022, two Metropolitan Police entry teams prepared to strike simultaneously in Canary Wharf. Months of intelligence work, data tracing and financial analysis had led them here. From the outside, they looked no different from hundreds of others, luxury rentals occupied by young professionals. Inside, however, detectives would find the center of a multi-million-pound cash network hidden in plain sight. The first team approached Biscayne Avenue. Inside one apartment lived Xiaoyu Xu, 29, and Yinying Wang, 28. When officers entered, the scene at first appeared unremarkable. Tidy rooms, folded laundry, nothing out of place. But as drawers and wardrobes were opened, the reality emerged. In one wardrobe, investigators found a carrier bag stuffed with £104,000 in cash, bundled tightly and labelled with handwritten notes. Alongside it were cash counting machines, money bags and receipts of previous collections, showing sums that reached hundreds of thousands of pounds. Across the same complex, the second team executed a warrant at the nearby flat of Yunchen Huang, 28. Here, the signs of large-scale cash handling were even clearer. Machines for counting and sorting notes sat plugged in beside a workstation. On the table, officers discovered ledgers and handwritten logs, each recording amounts, dates, and coded initials. The entries corresponded with figures recovered earlier from phones seized in North London, confirming that this was one of the central collection points in the network. By the time both searches were complete, police had seized close to £500,000 in assets from the two addresses: cash, equipment, and financial records. It was the most tangible proof yet that the group had constructed a parallel banking system within some of London's most expensive residential buildings. The raids also resulted in several arrests. Xu, Wang, and Huang were all detained at their addresses and questioned on suspicion of money laundering and operating unregistered money service businesses. Though cooperative during the searches, each offered minimal information. None admitted to knowing the true identity of the man giving them orders through encrypted channels. The evidence gathered that day, phones, ledgers, and encrypted messages, was handed over to forensic analysts. When the data was decrypted and cross-referenced, the chain of communication pointed decisively northward. Phone metadata, financial records, and the pattern of scheduled transfers all converged on a single source in Manchester. Within weeks, detectives secured a warrant for an apartment in Left Bank, Manchester, registered to Chaiji Wang, 29. When officers entered, the picture of the operation became clear. Inside were rows of electronic devices, mobile phones, SIM cards, computers, and bank cards under other people's names. On a desk sat a cash counting machine, its rollers dusted with the residue of recent use. But the most critical discovery was documentation. Digital and printed ledgers recording consignments of years, showing the flow of over £55 million through the system. The Manchester seizure confirmed what investigators had suspected for months. By the summer of 2024, the case reached its final stage inside Snaresbrook Crown Court. The 7 defendants faced judgment for their part in the laundering. The trial was methodical. Prosecutors presented all the overwhelming evidence that told the story of an invisible empire. Detective Constable Zach Rowe, who led the investigation, stood outside court after the final hearing. He said the sentencing eviscerated a professional gang of international launderers, a rare admission of just how complex and disciplined the operation had been. Over 2 hearings, in June and August 2024, the court delivered its sentences. Chaiji Wang, 29, received 12 years in prison for conspiracy to launder money and operating an unregistered money service business. Xiao Yu Shu, 29, and Yunchen Huang, 28, were sentenced to 3 years and 8 months and 3 years and 4 months, respectively. Ruolan Chen, 28, from Manchester, was jailed for 2 years for facilitating transactions and maintaining records. Peng Lu, 28, and Ang Li, 26, were each sentenced to 18 months for running an unregistered money service business and possessing criminal property. Yin Ying Wang, 28, who shared the Biscayne Avenue address with Xu, received 11 months for possession of criminal property. The collective total, 24 years and 11 months, marked the formal dismantling of a network that had, for years, operated in plain sight. While that network fell in 2024, another had begun years earlier, moving cash through hotel car parks and suitcases across London. At the centre of this operation was Yongheng Jin, a 36-year-old French national who lived in Manchester. To the outside world, Jin appeared ordinary, a well-dressed man who travelled often and kept his dealings discreet. But beneath that calm surface, He coordinated the movement of hundreds of thousands of pounds for organised networks, using couriers and coded exchanges to keep transactions invisible. His wife, Xiao Kun-tu, a German national, played a vital supporting role. Chu managed communication and logistics, ensuring that exchanges were properly timed and that cash reached its next point without delay. She acted as Jin's second pair of eyes, fluent in multiple languages, methodical, and trusted to handle sensitive information without leaving a trace. Supporting them was Marcel Meko, an Albanian national based in Chelsea. Meko was a courier, the kind who operated in public yet went unnoticed. His task was simple but critical: to collect and deliver large volumes of cash. He understood how to blend in, using everyday settings as covers for complex exchanges. The fourth member, Luis Martos Gardner, a 48-year-old Spanish national from Chesterfield, provided the mobility that held the system together. He handled transport between locations, ensuring that cash moved quickly and cleanly from one meeting to the next. Together, the four formed a compact network, international in makeup and precise in execution. Unlike the sprawling digital systems uncovered years later, their model relied on physical control and trust, brief meetings, consistent handovers, and communication built on familiarity rather than technology. They weren't laundering billions, but they were efficient. A self-contained circuit that could shift money faster than a wire transfer and disappear just as easily. It was a smaller operation, but in its discipline and structure, it mirrored the larger financial underworld Britain was only beginning to uncover. By late 2016, the National Crime Agency had begun to notice patterns in cash movements that defied logic. Large amounts of money were circulating through London without any digital footprint, no bank transactions without paper trail and tax record. Surveillance teams traced some of these unexplained transfers to a series of meetings taking place in and around hotels across the city. It was during one of those stakeouts that investigators caught sight of Yongheng Jin. On a cold November morning, they watched as he arrived at the car park of a North London hotel, driving a dark vehicle that officers had linked to earlier financial intelligence reports. Moments later, Marcel Meko appeared. The two exchanged only a few words before Jin opened the boot of his car and lifted out a large black suitcase. What looked like an ordinary handover was anything but. The NCA's financial crime officers, already positioned nearby, moved in as Jin walked toward the hotel entrance with the case. When they stopped him, the contents told the rest of the story. £420,000 in bundled cash, packed tightly and labelled in denominations, ready for redistribution. But when NCA officers entered Yongheng Jin's hotel room, the true scale of the operation finally came into focus. The space, rented for only a few nights, had been transformed into a temporary finance centre. On the desk sat a cash counting machine, still warm from use, surrounded by neat stacks of sterling. Nearby were rubber bands, money bags, a UV counterfeit detector, and sheets of paper filled with rows of handwritten numbers. A crude but effective record of transactions. In the drawers, investigators found bank cards, each issued in a different name, and several mobile phones, some still connected to messaging apps used to coordinate pickups. The devices were encrypted, but not beyond reach. Data, later extracted from them, showed dates, amounts, and initials linking Jin's movements to cash collections elsewhere in London. Then came the moment no one expected. As officers catalogued the evidence, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was Luis Martos Gardner, unaware that his associate was already in custody. When asked his purpose, Gardner hesitated, just long enough for officers to make the connection. A quick search of his vehicle in the car park revealed another £340,000 in cash, packed into bags and concealed beneath ordinary luggage. The combined seizures from Jin and Gardner totaled approximately £760,000, one of the largest cash recoveries from a single field operation that year. But beyond the money itself, what mattered most were the patterns hidden inside the ledgers and phones. They detailed a flow of funds stretching from London to Manchester and beyond, involving exchanges across currencies and borders. A few days later, the trail led officers to Xiaoquan Chu. When NCA teams executed their warrant in March 2017, they found the final piece of the puzzle. Inside Tu's home, investigators uncovered multiple mobile phones, a laptop, and further bundles of cash, along with handwritten notes that mirrored the figures recovered from Jin's hotel room. Each page recorded initials, amounts, and exchange dates, evidence that Tu had been managing the records and logistics behind her husband's physical exchanges. She was arrested on site, bringing the total number of suspects to 4. The search confirmed that this was not a spontaneous laundering scheme, but a coordinated financial network. When the case finally reached Kingston Crown Court, there was little left to contest. The evidence was overwhelming. All 4 defendants pleaded guilty to money laundering offences, acknowledging their roles in an operation. Yongheng Jin was sentenced to 40 months imprisonment for laundering and controlling criminal property. His wife, Xiaoquan Tu, received 42 months, the longest of the group. Luis Martos Gardner was also jailed for 40 months. Marcel Miko was sentenced to 20 months. In total, the 4 were handed 11 years and 10 months in prison. The National Crime Agency described the case as a textbook example of how professional launderers sustain wider criminal markets. The trial also drew comparisons to later larger operations, including the Chinese underground banking network dismantled in 2024 that we had just covered. Monday, 1st of July, 2024, evening rush hour on London's Victoria Line, one of the busiest hours of the day. Hundreds of commuters underground, phones in hand, scrolling through messages as the train doors slide open and close. Then, almost at once, devices across the carriages began to vibrate. A text flashed on screens from what looked like a legitimate courier service. Your shipment has been suspended due to missing address details. Click here to update. For most, it was an annoyance. For one passenger, it was a warning. That commuter noticed something strange on the platform at Victoria Station. A man stood waiting beside a large green suitcase, but he wasn't travelling. He wasn't checking arrival boards or boarding any train. He was watching, and the message on the passenger's phone had arrived at the exact same moment. The man's name was Kong Ji Chen, 31 years old. On the surface, he appeared ordinary, dressed neatly, calm, and patient. But the passenger's unease turned into suspicion, and moments later, British Transport Police were alerted. When officers arrived, Chen was still on the platform, his suitcase at his feet. He told them he was waiting for a friend, yet what the suitcase contained had nothing to do with luggage or travel. Inside was a battery pack connected by wires to a metal circuit box, its indicator light glowing green. From one end extended a small black antenna, still transmitting faintly. At first glance, it looked like an improvised radio, but to the trained eye of a British Transport Police technician, it was something else entirely. A portable SMS blaster, also known as a fake cell tower or stingray device. The system had been built to mimic a real mobile signal, tricking nearby phones into connecting to it automatically. Once connected, the device flooded them with preloaded messages. In this case, the fake parcel mail texts that had appeared across the Victoria Line only moments before Chen's arrest. As the officers examined the suitcase, one of them felt his own phone buzz. The message was the same fraudulent alert, proof that he too had been within range of the broadcast. That realization changed the tone of the investigation completely. This wasn't a small-scale spam operation. It was a live cyber attack happening beneath the streets of London. Chen was immediately taken into custody. The device was sealed for analysis, and a forensic team from British Transport Police's cyber unit began dismantling it piece by piece. Their findings confirmed what the officers already suspected. Chen had deployed a self-contained, battery-powered SMS transmission unit capable of sending thousands of texts within minutes, completely outside the control of the major phone networks. Data extracted from the equipment revealed that over 165 identical messages had been broadcast between 2:38 p.m. and 10:37 p.m. on July 1st. The timing aligned exactly with reports received by mobile operators and the National Cybersecurity Center, each flagging the same scam link. And at the center of it was one man, one suitcase, and a moment of alertness from a single commuter who refused to ignore what didn't feel right. What followed next would reveal exactly how Chen had turned a simple piece of hardware into a weapon of deception, and how close he came to disappearing into the crowd. When the case reached Inner London Crown Court, there was little argument left to make. The evidence sat plainly on the table. Kongji Chen, 31 years old, stood accused of possessing or controlling an article for use in fraud. He pleaded guilty. Detective Constable Adrienne Curzon of the British Transport Police credited the vigilance of the commuter who first raised the alarm and the swift collaboration between investigators and the country's leading network providers. Together, they confirmed how the device had exploited an old flaw in modern communications: the unencrypted 2G signal. These portable transmitters, sometimes sold online for as little as a few £1,000s, mimic legitimate mobile towers, tricking phones into believing they are part of the network. Once connected, users have no idea that their devices are being targeted. Because the messages never travel through an official carrier, spam filters and anti-fraud systems are powerless to stop them. On October 15, 2024, Chen was sentenced to 24 weeks imprisonment, a short sentence by length, but one that carried a sharp message. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.